Welcome to Sherlock Tales, where every mystery comes alive. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, give this video a like, and share it with your fellow mystery lovers. Tell us in the comments, which part of the world are you watching from? Let's solve mysteries together.
It has long been my habit, in selecting from the varied chronicles of my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes, to pass over those affairs in which the explanation, though sound, depended more upon the caprices of fortune than upon the play of reason. The present history owes nothing to chance. It began with a simple absence, so simple that Scotland Yard, with the best will, did not at first know how to name it. An absence not of a person, but of a thing every honest Englishman takes for granted, a shadow. It was a grey morning in late November, the kind of London day that seems to be stitched from damp flannel. Our fire burned cheerfully, and Holmes, his long limbs folded into his armchair, was engaged in the delicate surgery of a violin string. He had balanced the instrument across his knee, and with a watchmaker's tweezers, coaxed a new E into docility. The papers lay disregarded upon the hearthrug. I had, however, observed a short paragraph ringed in blue. Pencil, Holmes's method of salting a page for later. Harvest, concerning a mysterious assault near the Strand the previous night. Mrs. Hudson had scarcely withdrawn with the E. Breakfast tray when there came upon our step the decisive tread of a man who believes himself, expected by fate if not by householders. A moment later, Inspector G. Lestrade entered, spare as ever, the brim of his hat glittering with recent rain. His expression had the set of a man who brings news he despises but cannot ignore. "You have read it, Mr. Holmes," he began without preamble, pointing his chin toward the marked column. Holmes did not look up. "I note your left cuff, Inspector," said he mildly. "The chalk upon it argues close acquaintance with a pavement last night, and the scuff on your boot suggests you took a header after something or someone. Pray be seated. The kettle still sings of its usefulness." Lestrade coughed into a fist and sat. "There's a fancy to it, Mr. Holmes, and I'd not have disturbed you for a common cutpurse. We have our share of them without troubling Baker Street. But I've a constable on the embankment, swearing upon his oath, and I have 2 clerks from the post office, ready to swear likewise, that the man they chased down Villiers Street had no shadow at all, when he passed beneath the lamp." "No shadow, Inspector," said I. "In the gaslight?" "Say electric, Doctor," Lestrade returned grimly. "One of your new arc lamps near Charing Cross, bright as noon. The witnesses say they saw the fellow clear as a signboard, but where his feet should have printed black upon the wet stones, there was nothing. They were near enough to smell something queer about him, too. A reek like burnt eggs. He dodged a cab, slipped between 2 dray horses without a touch, and when they reached the corner he was gone." Holmes set down the violin and at last honoured the inspector with his eyes. "Pray continue. The assault was upon a gentleman, Mr. Aloysius Penruddock, a solicitor to certain foreign embassies. Nothing taken but a pocket-book and a small parcel wrapped in black oilskin. We found Mr. Penruddock fainting against the railings. A bruise upon the temple, no blood. He is recovered now, but tight-lipped as a clam about the parcel. Says it was of no value to anyone but himself. I am not so green as to swallow that." "You were right to come," said Holmes. "The paragraph spoke only of a strange deficiency of shadow, reported by excited persons. What have you not told us?" Lestrade hesitated, and then reached into his coat. From an inner pocket, he produced a narrow slip of glass 2 inches by 1, darkened to a smoky translucence as though it had been held too long above a flame. "This was in Mr. Penruddock's glove," he said. "A man puts odd things in his glove when he is rattled. We should have overlooked it but for the smell. It turns the stomach." Holmes received the glass reverently between forefinger and thumb and held it to the window. A triangle, faint as a watermark, showed itself in the centre. A small, perfect figure cut clean through the smoke. He put the slip to his nose, and a faint wrinkle crossed his features. "Sulphur compounds, Watson, and something of the photographer's bench. Fixer upon the skin, hypo, if I do not mistake. Curious. And you say the lamp beneath which the fellow passed was one of the new arc installations?" "Installed last month," said Lestrade. "A marvel, so I'm told. A terror to housebreakers, at any rate. Men have no business going shadowless under them." "No man is shadowless," Holmes murmured. except he contrives to walk with another shadow that is not his own. I confess I shot him a look, for this was precisely the sort of phrase with which he baited his hook before a cast. He placed the slip upon the mantel, flanked it with 2 brass bookends as if to afford it the dignity of a museum label, and turned again to Lestrade. "Describe your quarry." "Average height." "A light step, quick, not hurried." "Dark coat, the sort city gents favour." Hat pulled low. "The constable swears the fellow wore gloves in the rain, and that there was a smear on one cuff like you had rubbed charcoal upon it." "The smell I mentioned, and here's the last thing. When he ran across the road, an omnibus lamp took him broadside. Driver says he ought to have cast a bar upon the wheel. There was none. He laughs now because who'll believe an omnibus driver? But he swears it." Holmes steepled his fingers. "You observed the pavement yourself. It was sluiced by that time. But I tell you frankly, Mr. Holmes, we took prints on the north side, clear as a ledger, and then they stopped dead at the curb. Nothing across the way. I've seen men vanish down alleys. I've not seen them step off their own footprints. You have given me a sweetmeat with more flavour than bulk, Inspector," Holmes replied. "I must nibble it from the corners. Mr. Penruddock's address." Lestrade passed a card. "And his parcel?" asked Holmes. "What did he call it?" "A trifle," said Lestrade sourly. "A trifle wrapped as if bound for the bottom of the sea. Oilskin black, sealed with wax. The seal broken by the time we found him. He has since said it was a private curiosity. He will not enlarge." Holmes's eyes had returned to the smoky glass. "A private curiosity with a photographer's stink. An assailant who seems to shed his shadow like an old overcoat, and a street washed of prints where a man has certainly passed. Come, Watson, our hats. Inspector, you will accompany us to Mr. Penruddock and afterwards to the lamp in question. I should like to see a place where shadows are selective." Before we left, Holmes took a small lens from his drawer and, with the delicacy of a jeweller, examined the triangle cut into the glass. "A neat puncture near one corner," he observed aloud, as much to himself as to us. "Threaded, perhaps, and trace crystals adhered to the smoky film. Prismatic under the light. Salt from the fixer, yes, but something else. Sand as fine as flour. You were in Villiers Street. Then the embankment is proximate, with all its grit and river gifts. Still, this is not the embankment's sand." He slipped the glass into a paper and tucked it away. As we descended the stairs, he took up his violin for one brief, plaintive phrase, a minor chord that hung in the air like a thought half expressed, and set it down again, as if the note itself had told him nothing and everything. The rain had ceased, but London had kept the memory of it. We rolled in a hansom toward Bedford Row, where Mr. Penruddock kept chambers that looked as if one day they had been aired, and then promptly sealed against time. The gentleman received us with the reluctance of a man who finds himself both aggrieved and ridiculous. He was past 50, with white bristles at the ear and a mouth that snapped shut upon certain words, as if they were morsels unfit for polite company. "You were struck from behind, Mr. Penruddock," said Holmes with a civility that made Lestrade's bluntness seem almost homely. "Pray relive the disagreeable minute for us, omitting nothing that may appear trivial to you and vital to me." "I had just left the station," said the solicitor after a late consultation. "I had upon my person a document of no value to any thief. I was aware of a step, then a smell most objectionable, like some laboratory run to rot, and then a blow. When I woke, I was sitting on the stones with a policeman tugging at my elbow, asking whether my assailant had been a ghost. It is not a jest I particularly relish." Holmes's gaze drifted to the mantel, where upon a leather pad there rested a second strip of glass, this one unblackened, clear as water. He did not point. He merely looked until Mr. Penruddock noticed his looking. "A memento from last night?" Holmes murmured. Penruddock hesitated. "No. A curiosity kept from earlier, personal." "It has no bearing. Everything bears," said Holmes gently. "I should like to borrow that curiosity if I may, and for my part I will repay you with a fragment of assurance. Your assailant chose you not for who you are, but for what you carried. As to his want of shadow, well, there are men who walk with other men's darkness. There are also men who bring their own light. You speak in riddles, sir," the solicitor snapped, but he gave up the glass all the same. When we emerged once more into the street, Holmes's face had taken on that traveller's look I knew so well, as if he were already miles ahead with the case in his pocket, and we were, Poor Watson and indefatigable Lestrade, obliged to catch him up before dusk. He tapped the pocket wherein the 2 slips of glass lay, the one smoky and cut, the other bright, and said only this: "If a man is said to cast no shadow, Watson, our first inquiry must be into the lamp. Our second into the ground upon which the shadow ought to fall, and our third into the little objects men carry and call trifles. For trifles, my dear fellow, are the most immodest of companions. They tell everything." With that we turned the hansom toward the Strand and the electric glare, to begin the search for a darkness that had apparently forgotten its master. We found the Strand still sweating from the shower, the stones wearing that faint oil-sheen glaze in which London loves to keep a secret. The electric lamp in question hummed like a caged insect, a harsh white eye set above Villiers Street. Holmes stepped from the cab without a word, and lifted his gaze to the apparatus, his head a shade to one side, the small, bird-like cant I had learnt to associate with an idea that had not yet asked permission to be born. He walked once round the base, keeping to the curb rather than the centre of the crossing, and then again narrower, as a dog might circle the spot at which a hare has doubled back. Lestrade, with official gravity, indicated the north pavement where the prince had ceased. Holmes did not at first look down. He stared instead at the iron column. A faint crescent of soot smudged the paint 3 feet above my eyeline, no bigger than a half-crown. "Someone has taught your lamp to weep," he murmured. "Observe, Watson, the tear track. It begins at the bracket and ends in a thumb's breadth of black upon the shaft. A thing was fastened here and then removed in haste while the carbon sputtered." He put his fingers lightly upon the iron and sniffed. "Burnt carbon, of course, but under it, there." "That sour touch," you remarked, Inspector. "Not the honest stink of the river, nor the sewer's ghost. Sulphurous with the sweetish bite of hyposulphite. A photographer has leaned his cheek against your city's new daybreak." Lestrade made a face. "A photographer, is it? With a pocketbook and an oilskin parcel his game? We have had our share of those gentry on Derby Day, Mr. Holmes, but they do not usually knock down solicitors." Holmes turned at last to the ground. The prints on the north side were as the inspector had described them, clear, wet ovals darkening at the toe, a light, forward habit in the step. At the curb the trail halted as neatly as if the man had been plucked into the air. Holmes crouched upon his heels and held his lens to the granite lip. "A soldier learns to read ground, Watson," he said quietly. "London writes in smaller letters, that is all." He indicated with a forefinger the narrow gutter where the rain had made a pet brook of the street. Upon the inner edge lay 3 grains clinging to the water's retreat as if reluctant to join it. To my eye they were dust. Under Holmes's glass they threw back a pale glint. "Not the river," he said, "and not the coarser grit of a builder's cart. This is flour-fine silica, polished by a wheel. Lens grinder's dust, Inspector. It will cling to cloth like a burr and migrate to a man's wrists when he wipes his hands upon a cuff." As your constable observed, Lestrade's jaw set. "You will tell me next that the fellow carried a lighthouse in his pocket." Holmes smiled with one corner of his mouth. "Nothing so picturesque. Counter-illumination, rather. A trick as old as the stage, but improved by chemistry. If you flood the side from which the lamp would throw your outline, the shadow is eaten like ink under a blotter. Our man contrived to walk with light upon his chest equal to, or slightly greater than, the downcast from above. The stones would show no bar." He pointed with the lens to the soot crescent on the post. Here he hung a reflector, or small lantern for a moment, while he adjusted some personal arrangement. He had not time to be tidy. Hence the smear. "You are telling me a man walked along the Strand wearing a lamp," said Lestrade, as if the very words might make them sensible. "Men have walked along the Strand wearing worse," Holmes returned. "A narrow breast lantern in a close coat would serve. A bull's-eye masked with a smoked slide will throw a sheet of pallid light without winking. The odour we notice proceeds from plates or paper ill-washed, or from fixer spilled upon the lining. Note 2. The witness who remarked gloves in the rain. A man is clumsy with chemicals on his skin and keeps his hands to himself. He moved into the road with that care which appears in him when his mind runs ahead of his body. There, midway between curb and curb, he stopped and stooped again. There, a fragment of black wax lay on the stone, no bigger than a seed, but its fracture showed the crisp, clean break of a fresh seal. He lifted it on a fingernail. The parcel, Watson. The C's own dress, oilskin, and the black wax. Here a crumb shook loose when the thing was snatched or torn. Do you see this fleck pressed into it? He held the lens for me. Within the wax, a microscopic triangle was impressed. So faint I should never have noticed it, without his incessant goading of my faculties. The same device appears upon the smoky glass from Mr. Penruddock's glove. The triangle is not a fancy. It is a signature. Lestrade's eyes narrowed. A club, a trademark? An alphabet of devices presents itself, said Holmes. Secret societies spend more on pomp. This is trade before it is oath. A lens maker would put triangles all day and not notice he had done it. I should like a list, Inspector, of photographic supply houses within a mile of Charing Cross and of opticians who grind their own. Ask also at the lanternists' dens, music hall men who require slides and light. There will be one establishment where a clerk's cuff shows the same pale bloom as your own, where a foreman's pockets smell faintly of rotten eggs, where black wafer wax sits in a dish by the sealing press. We will not be far wrong if we call there before night. Lestrade, to his credit, ceased to protest and began to instruct a constable who had drifted near like an inquisitive gull. Holmes meanwhile paced once, twice, and then stood beneath the lamp, raising his hands as if measuring a man's shoulders against the light. He drew from his pocket the clear slip of glass borrowed from Mr. Penruddock and held it in the beam. The triangle, invisible in the unkind daylight, whispered itself into being upon the whiteness, a crisp absence within clarity. Do you see how the cut will admit a thread? He said. A slide so pierced can be hung to darken or to tame a lamp. The smoky specimen from last night is the same, but clouded to soften the glare. Our man courts light and then fears it. He has made a pet of it, teaches it tricks, and yet must screen it lest it bite him in the eyes. A careful fellow in a careless hurry, he let the glass fall back into its paper and clapped the dust from his palms with a briskness that signaled transition. To the embankment, Watson. A man who vanishes between curb and curb has not become angelic. He has gone where a clever workman goes when pressed, down. We examined the iron mouths along the gutter. The second grating to the south wore a new scratch upon its lip, and a smear of that same sooty black. Holmes knelt, laid his cheek absurdly to the stone as if listening to the street's breath, and then thrust an arm to the elbow between the bars. When he withdrew his hand, he held a shred of black cloth with a button clinging to it. The cloth was of a dense, close weave. The button bore in minute relief the letters P.O. Post Office, I exclaimed. Holmes weighed it on a finger. Or a poor counterfeit meant to mislead. Consider your clerks, Inspector, the two who vouched the shadowlessness. Did our man wear a coat likely to pass unremarked among theirs? He drops into the culvert, crosses to the next mouth, and climbs out amid lawful brethren. A trick old as Falstaff's buck-basket. Lestrade's satisfaction was sharp and honest. We will ask at the sorting office this hour. If he is among them. He will not be among them, Holmes replied calmly. He only borrowed their skin. But we may learn where such a skin is stitched. Send your men. We will take the other end. And what end is that, Mr. Holmes? The end with the triangle upon it. There is a shop whose floor is dusted with ground glass as fine as flour, and whose sink chokes with hypo. There is a counter across which a small parcel was pushed to Mr. Aloysius Penruddock, with the manner of men who know more than they ask. If we can persuade that counter to speak, we shall discover why a gentleman's shadow offended someone so much that he must be stolen with his pocketbook. He hailed a cab, his eye bright now in that private way of his, as if the city had given up a syllable, and he held the rest of the word in his mouth. As we clambered in, the electric lamp hissed behind us, and I remember thinking, not for the first time, that London's new lights seemed to throw deeper darknesses than the old ones ever had. The cab bore us toward Charing Cross, wheels hissing on wet granite, while Holmes sat forward with his chin upon his knuckles, his gaze fixed not upon the passing windows, but some inner screen of calculation. I had grown familiar with that silence. It was the silence of a mind gathering threads too slender for the rest of us to perceive, weaving them into a rope stout enough to pull the truth into daylight. Lestrade, beside me, shifted uneasily as if the hush itself accused him of incompleteness. When at length Holmes spoke, it was not to us, but to the air. A solicitor entrusted with a parcel of singular secrecy, a thief who cloaks himself in light, the signature of a triangle impressed upon wax and glass. There is an economy in it, Watson, an economy which argues design. No man carries such contrivances merely to rob a gentleman's purse. No, the parcel was the magnet. Penruddock, the unfortunate iron drawn by it. The hansom halted outside a narrow shop front, squeezed between a tobacconist and a boarding house. Its windows were half-curtained and filled with lantern slides, stereoscopes, and photographic chemicals in brown bottles. Holmes dismounted without comment and entered, the bell above the door giving a small nervous jingle. Inside, the air hung heavy with the acrid perfume we had already learned to associate with our phantom. Behind the counter, a pale young man looked up, his hands still bearing the traces of silver nitrate. His startled glance shifted from Holmes to Lestrade, then steadied with that peculiar defiance which springs from guilt, imperfectly hidden. "Good day," said Holmes affably, as if purchasing a child's toy. "I have need of certain slides for a lantern. Triangular aperture, smoked surface. A friend directed me here." The youth blinked, then nodded quickly. "We do make such things, sir, though not for common sale. For optical demonstrations, you understand." He bent and produced a small tray in which lay several slips of glass, one of them scored with the familiar puncture at the corner. Holmes's fingers hovered, but did not touch. "Admirable workmanship," he murmured. "And this seal?" He indicated a block of black wax upon the shelf, still warm at the edge where a stick had been pressed. "Trade use, sir," the youth stammered. "To fasten the wrappings for chemicals." Nothing sinister. Holmes leaned across the counter with sudden sharpness. "You sold such a slide last evening, did you not? To a gentleman with a dark coat, gloves in the rain, and a smell about him like your shop multiplied tenfold." The boy's eyes widened. His mouth opened, but before speech came a voice from the doorway behind. "Enough, Thomas," we turned. A man of middle years stood there, clean-shaven, spectacles glinting. His coat dusted faintly as if with pale flour. He advanced with measured step, calm but wary, his gaze travelling from Holmes to Lestrade with quick intelligence. "I am Mr. Bracknell, proprietor. My assistant knows nothing of your errand. It was I who served the customer of whom you speak. A demonstration lantern, nothing more." He paid in good coin. That is the end of it. Holmes bowed slightly, his eyes half-lidded in that dangerous politeness which I had seen precede the unmasking of many a rogue. Indeed. And yet this customer required a slide cut for suspension, and wax suitable for seals of secrecy. You are too clever a tradesman not to perceive the purpose. Tell me, Mr. Bracknell, was it also nothing when he asked you for oilskin sheeting? When he inquired how long hypo would cling to a man's clothes? The proprietor's composure faltered, but did not wholly break. "You draw inferences, sir. They may be brilliant, but they are not proof." Lestrade stepped forward, bristling. "Proof enough to search your premises, Bracknell." Holmes raised a hand. "Not yet, Inspector. Let us not frighten the bird before we have traced its nest." He turned back to the man. "What was the name he gave?" Bracknell's lips tightened. "A tradesman sells. He does not catechize." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Then I shall supply the name for you. The man you served is one who goes by many, but to your ears he gave the initials VH, am I right?" The proprietor's silence was answer enough. Holmes pocketed one of the clear slides with an easy gesture, leaving a coin upon the counter. "We will trouble you no longer, for now. Come, Watson. Inspector, a word outside." We emerged into the raw air again, the gas jet sputtering in the drizzle. Lestrade caught Holmes by the sleeve. "You know him, then, the man with no shadow?" Holmes's expression was unreadable. "I know of him. Victor Haldane, a chemist once of some standing in the photographic departments of the Royal Institution, dismissed under a cloud for experiments of dubious safety. He has a particular mania for light, believes it can be bent, erased, even tamed like an animal. His dismissal left him penniless and bitter. Such men rarely choose obscurity. They choose mischief. And Penruddock?" I asked. Holmes looked toward the fog, his eyes bright with that flame which only the chase could kindle. "Penruddock's parcel, Watson, was no trifle. Within that oilskin lay something Haldane desired enough to risk his liberty. The continuation of some experiment, perhaps, or the plans for it. Until we know precisely what, we are groping in his artificial glare. But one fact shines. The assault was no chance robbery. It was an attempt to seize knowledge." Lestrade swore under his breath. "Then our solicitor is holding back more than we guessed." "Precisely. And therefore our next step is not to hunt Haldane, he will keep, but to return to Penruddock and prize from him the truth of his parcel." Without that, we chase shadows. The cab bore us once more through dripping streets to Bedford Row. Penruddock received us with even greater reluctance than before, his manner that of a man cornered by inevitability. Holmes wasted no time on courtesies. "Mr. Penruddock," said he, "you were attacked last night not by a common thief but by Victor Haldane, formerly of the Royal Institution. He sought not your purse but the parcel you carried. If you value your own safety, sir, and ours in attempting to protect you, you will tell us what that parcel contained." The solicitor's hands trembled upon the arm of his chair. He looked from one to the other of us, his lips working soundlessly, until at last he whispered, "It was a glass plate." Holmes inclined his head. "Describe it a photographic negative," Penruddock confessed, "but not of a portrait nor of any landscape. It was of a page, from an ancient manuscript. The original lies in the possession of a client of mine, a foreign gentleman of means. The plate was to be developed abroad where secrecy might be preserved. I undertook the transport myself, and the content of this manuscript," Holmes asked. Penruddock's voice dropped further. "A formula, Mr. Holmes. A formula said to alter the properties of light itself." Holmes's eyes gleamed as he shot me a swift glance. "Then, Watson, we have our motive. A man without a shadow seeks to make the world his laboratory, and a solicitor who keeps secrets in oilskin may yet plunge us all into darkness." Penruddock's confession seemed to draw the very air from the room. For a long moment, there was only the faint hiss of rain against the window and the steady tick of the solicitor's mantel clock, each second falling like the slow drip of some corrosive truth. Holmes stood unmoving, his gaze fixed upon the man as though he could pierce the layers of evasion clinging to him. A formula to alter the properties of light. Holmes repeated at last, his voice low but edged with steel. "You are carrying not a trinket, but a fragment of power. Knowledge that in the wrong hands could change the very face of detection, of war, of industry. And you saw fit to cloak it in silence." Penruddock stirred uneasily in his chair, his eyes narrowing with a kind of defensive pride. "I am bound by my client's trust. The manuscript is foreign, ancient, perhaps little more than alchemical fancy. My role was simply to ensure its reproduction remained secret." Holmes bent nearer, his shadow stretching across the solicitor like a pen-stroke of judgment. "Foreign, ancient, yet enough to tempt Victor Haldane to strip himself of common humanity and become a creature without shadow. You see, sir, the magnitude of your concealment. Already a man has risked jail for it. Before another night passes, he may risk lives." Lestrade shifted impatiently. "Then hand it over, man. If it's dangerous, we'll put it in safe custody at the Yard." But Penruddock shook his head with a firmness born of fear rather than principle. "I cannot. It is not in my possession now. The plate was taken." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Taken entire or merely broken?" "Entire," said Penruddock. "When I awoke on the pavement, the parcel was gone. Yet I believe Haldane may not have triumphed wholly. The plate was unfinished, the development incomplete. Without certain chemical notes which remain with me, it is useless." Holmes straightened, the faintest flicker of relief crossing his features. "Then the game shifts. Haldane holds the image but not the key. You, sir, clutch the key but no longer the image. It is inevitable he will return for you." Penruddock paled visibly, his lips moving without sound. Holmes turned briskly to Lestrade. "Inspector, you will assign a watch to this house, discreet but constant. I shall not trust the law's net alone, however. Watson, we remain close at hand." As we left the chambers, Holmes set a rapid pace along Bedford Row, his coat whipping about his knees in the drizzle. His mind was plainly aflame. I had learned to read that quick rhythm of stride as the outward expression of inward calculation. "Watson," said he, "we tread the threshold of a peril both intellectual and practical. If Haldane can indeed harness light to erase shadows or distort them, every alley becomes a theatre for his mischief. He could walk unseen in the heart of London. Yet even such brilliance requires crude accomplices, chemists, tradesmen, lanternists. Bracknell's establishment gave us the scent. Now we must follow it to its den. But where to look? I asked. "Where a man obsessed with light may find both solitude and supply," Holmes replied. "Not in broad Mayfair, but in the forgotten basements of the city. There are cellars near the river where lanternists and optical tinkerers congregate. I have heard whispers of demonstrations held at odd hours, shows of uncanny devices for a coin. Such a haunt will shelter Haldane. Even as he spoke, the cab bore us westward through the rising mist. By the time we reached the embankment, the lamps were struggling in the fog, their circles of light smudged and trembling. Holmes led us down a narrow turning beneath the arches of Waterloo Bridge, where the stones sweated with damp and the smell of coal smoke mingled with river mud. A faint murmur reached us, men's voices, a rasp of metal and the hiss of flame. Holmes touched my sleeve, urging silence. Through a half-open door spilled a wavering sheet of white, brighter than any common gas lamp. He motioned us nearer, and together we peered into the gloom. Within, a dozen rough benches faced a makeshift stage. A lantern projected a dazzling beam against a hanging cloth, upon which danced silhouettes of grotesque shape, figures elongated, erased, or twisted into impossible forms. A handful of onlookers, clerks and sailors alike muttered in awe, and presiding at the contraption, lean and sharp in profile, stood the very man Holmes had named, Victor Haldane. He manipulated his lantern with the poise of a conjurer, sliding plates, adjusting mirrors, producing in an instant a figure without shadow, then one that seemed doubled, tripled, dissolved. His voice rang with feverish triumph. "Light is the tyrant of perception, gentlemen, but it can be taught obedience. With the right formula, the right glass, we walk unchained from darkness itself." Holmes drew back into the fog, his hand tightening on my arm. "We have found our bird's roost, but a roost alone is not enough. We must learn his next flight. To rush him now is folly. We watch, we listen." For an hour we lingered until the crowd dispersed and the lamps were doused. Haldane gathered his apparatus into crates, his motions deliberate yet tinged with nervous haste. Twice he glanced at a small leather notebook which he kept close to his breast. Holmes's eyes followed the gesture with hawk-like intensity. When at last Haldane departed, slipping into the fog toward the north, Holmes whispered, "That book contains the missing notes or his attempt to reconstruct them. Either way, it is the bridge between Penruddock's secret and Haldane's ambition. We must have it." We trailed him through the mist, silent as his absent shadow. At Charing Cross he paused, looking about with the wariness of a hunted man, then descended toward the underground. Holmes pressed a coin into a porter's hand, murmured swift instructions and drew me aside. "Watson, tonight he will vanish beneath the city, but not forever. His apparatus cannot be hidden in a valise. It requires a lair. Tomorrow we shall flush it. For now let him dream himself safe. The greater the illusion, the sharper the disillusion when it breaks." And so we let Victor Haldane pass into the tunnels, carrying with him the ghost of a shadow and the promise of a darkness yet to fall. Holmes's face in the lamplight was unreadable, but his words as we turned back to Baker Street carried both gravity and resolve. "We are not merely chasing a thief, Watson. We are pursuing a philosophy made flesh, a man who believes he can rewrite the laws of light. If he succeeds, London itself becomes his canvas, and every crime may vanish like a shadow at noon. We must reach him before the city learns what it means for a man to walk in brightness and leave no trace at all." The fog had thickened by the time we returned to Baker Street, clinging to the windows like the breath of some giant beast. Holmes shed his coat without a word and went directly to his chemical table, striking a match to a lamp whose steady glow was in striking contrast to the restless flickering we had witnessed under Waterloo Bridge. I poured us each a measure of whiskey, for I felt in need of fortification, and seated myself where I might study my companion. His long fingers moved swiftly, assembling glass vessels and reagents, his face drawn tight in concentration. "We must understand, Watson," he said at length, "what it is that Haldane seeks to perfect. Without that, we shall ever be half a step behind. You heard Penruddock, a formula altering the properties of light. Alchemy, perhaps, but even folly has its method." He took up the smoky slide we had recovered and held it near the lamp. "Observe how the clouding disperses the glare, how the triangle cut serves as anchor for suspension. These are no idle tricks. They are experiments toward invisibility or something near it." I could not suppress a shiver. Invisibility. Was that not the very word most feared in our imaginations? The idea of a criminal walking unseen through crowded streets chilled me more than any knife in the dark. Holmes read my thought. "Not true invisibility, Watson. Do not allow fancy to mislead you. Merely the manipulation of perception. Shadows erased, outlines softened. A man who walks yet seems displaced. Already we have seen enough to know it is possible. The danger lies in Haldane's belief that he can refine it into science rather than stagecraft. He poured a small measure of acid into a dish, then sprinkled upon it a dust he had scraped from the wax fleck. At once the liquid hissed, releasing a faint sulphurous fume. Holmes leaned over it with his lens, his nostrils flaring. Hypo and silica both, just as I surmised. With the proper treatment, Watson, one may create a slide that not only obscures but actively bends the light about it. That is the essence of Haldane's pursuit. Before I could reply, there came a sharp rap upon the door. Mrs. Hudson admitted Inspector Lestrade, his hat dripping and his face grim. He wasted no time on pleasantries. "Penruddock has been attacked again, Mr. Holmes." Holmes straightened, his eyes like knives. "Speak plainly." The watch outside his chambers was found drugged. Chloroform in their flasks, no doubt slipped to them by some street hawker in Haldane's employ. Penruddock himself was discovered bound in his study. The man had ransacked the place, but took nothing save a bundle of papers from the solicitor's desk. Penruddock swears they were unrelated to the manuscript, mere correspondence, but I have learnt to mistrust a lawyer's oath. Holmes set his jaw. Did he harm Penruddock? Only enough to silence him. The fellow had vanished before the constables revived. No sign of him beyond an open grating into the sewer. Holmes began pacing, each stride measured, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Twice in 2 nights, Watson. Our adversary grows reckless. He has the plate, he now has papers. Whether vital or trivial, he believes them useful. He will not stop until he holds every piece of the puzzle, which means he will act again, and soon." Lestrade frowned. "Then we must set a trap." "Just so," Holmes replied. "But to bait it, we must know what Haldane values above all. The plate is incomplete without the notes. The notes are indecipherable without some key. What remains to Penruddock that his enemy cannot yet seize?" We looked at one another, struck by the same realization. Holmes spoke it first. "The man himself, precisely. Haldane may take every scrap of paper, but only Penruddock possesses the memory of the formula entire. If he wishes to perfect his art, he must extract it from the solicitor's mind. Then we set the snare," Lestrade declared. "Offer him his chance, and when he takes it, close the jaws." Holmes's gaze was cool. "Not so simple, Inspector. We must choose the place carefully. To wait again in Bedford Row is to hand Haldane the advantage of familiarity. No better to remove Penruddock under pretense of safety and house him where we control every entrance. Baker Street will not serve. Haldane knows it too well by now, but I recall a certain warehouse by the river, long disused save for my own occasional experiments. Its windows may be shuttered, its approaches watched. There we may invite our guest." By the following afternoon, arrangements were complete. Penruddock, though pale and trembling, submitted to the plan with the resignation of a man who sees no alternative. He was lodged in a chamber lit only by a single lamp, while Lestrade posted men in the shadows outside. Holmes and I kept vigil in an upper loft, watching the silent Thames slide by beyond the shutters. Hours passed. The night grew deeper, the fog thicker. Then Holmes touched my arm. "Do you hear it, Watson?" At first I caught nothing but the creak of timbers. Then came a faint metallic rasp, the scrape of iron against stone. From below drifted a thread of that same sulphurous odor we had smelt before. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "He is here." The lamp in Penruddock's chamber flickered suddenly, as if smothered by an unseen hand. I glimpsed through the slats a figure gliding forward, hat pulled low, coat buttoned high, and around his breast a faint pallid glow that made the shadows recoil. No outline fell upon the floor. He moved as though detached from substance. Holmes sprang to his feet, signaling to Lestrade's men. "Now, Watson, quietly." But Haldane was swifter than I had dreamed. Even as the constables burst in, he flung down a small canister, and at once the room filled with choking smoke. Figures stumbled and cursed, blinded by the sting. Through the haze I saw him seize Penruddock, pressing the man's head back as though to compel some confession. Holmes leapt down the stairs 2 at a time, plunging into the cloud. I followed, revolver drawn, my heart hammering. Shapes loomed and vanished in the murk. A crash of glass, a shout, and then silence. When the smoke thinned, Penruddock lay gasping on the floor, free but shaken. The window stood shattered, the night air streaming in. Of Haldane there was no sign, save a smear of soot upon the sill and a single object left behind, a leather notebook, fallen in his flight. Holmes stooped and lifted it with a gloved hand. His eyes scanned the cramped lines within, and I saw his face harden with grim understanding. He closed it sharply and slipped it into his pocket. "We have baited the trap, Watson, but the quarry has snapped at it and broken free. Still, he leaves us his teeth marks. Within these pages lies the shape of his obsession. He will not abandon it. He will return. And when he does, we must be ready, not with net alone, but with understanding of the very light he seeks to master." He looked out into the fog, where the broken window framed nothing but darkness. The hunt was far from over, and already I felt the chill of a city where one man walked unseen, teaching even shadows to betray their masters. Holmes did not speak until we were once more in Baker Street, the damp fog trailing after us like some persistent phantom. He laid the recovered notebook upon his desk and locked the door against interruption. Only then did he open it, his long fingers turning the pages with reverent caution, as though each might contain a charge strong enough to ignite the room. I leaned forward, straining to decipher the dense, crabbed script. The words were a mixture of chemical formulae and feverish notes in Haldane's hand, spattered with smudges of nitrate and grease. "It is the mind of an unbalanced genius," Holmes murmured. "See here, Watson. Hypo combined with silica vapor. Notes upon refractive indices, sketches of lantern contraptions with mirrored sleeves. And there, a fragment of the manuscript copied by Penruddock's plate. The symbols are medieval, yet beside them Haldane scribbles values of modern science. He seeks to weld superstition and optics into a new alloy. What does it mean in practice?" I asked, uneasy at the intensity with which Holmes studied the pages. "That a man may walk in bright light yet deny the earth his shadow. That he may stand before you and seem displaced, distorted, his outline rendered untrustworthy. Haldane's obsession is with the mastery of perception. And you see, he notes here that the completed formula requires a catalyst, something he has not yet seized from Penruddock. Without it his work falters. With it he believes himself invincible." Lestrade, who had hovered impatiently, tapped a finger upon the page. "Can we not use it to hunt him down? Publish these symbols, warn the city." Holmes closed the book firmly. To broadcast such knowledge would be to scatter sparks in a powder room. "No, Inspector. The fewer who understand this, the better. Our task is to turn Haldane's own obsession against him. He has twice slipped through our hands, but each time he leaves behind something of himself. He cannot resist showing his genius. Pride is the crack in his lantern, and through it we must strike." He rose abruptly and paced the carpet, his hands clasped behind his back. "Consider, Watson. Twice he has vanished into the sewers. Twice he has used smoke to confound pursuit. These are not the habits of a man at home in daylight. He has made himself a creature of the underground, a dweller in the places where light may be controlled. Therefore, if we are to catch him, we must force him above into illumination he cannot bend." "And how?" I asked. "By presenting him with bait irresistible. Penruddock's memory is valuable, but memory can be coaxed. What Haldane craves is certainty. If he learns that a complete transcription of the manuscript will be conveyed to a secure location under guard, he will strike. We shall arrange such a convoy, but the guard will not be what he expects." Lestrade brightened at this, though I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. "A decoy, then? But who will carry it?" Holmes turned to me with that faint, sardonic smile which always made my heart beat faster. "Who better than the one man whose fidelity is beyond question? My dear Watson, you shall be the courier. I confess I started, for though I had long shared in Holmes's dangers, the notion of setting myself up as quarry for a shadowless man was hardly inviting. Yet his gaze brooked no refusal, and I felt the weight of our duty. "Very well," I said quietly. "Tell me what I must do." The following evening found me attired in a sober black coat, a leather portfolio clasped under my arm. Within it lay no ancient formula, but blank sheets weighted to suggest substance. Holmes had arranged that word of my errand would reach ears friendly to Haldane's spies. The manuscript, it was said, was to be conveyed to a vault within the Bank of England. Lestrade's men shadowed me at a distance, while Holmes himself had vanished, leaving only the brief assurance that he would be near. The streets were thick with fog once more, the lamps glowing like coins seen through milk. I kept to my pace, striving for calm, though each echo of a footstep behind me set my nerves jangling. At Chancery Lane I paused beneath a lamp, pretending to consult my watch. The pavement about me seemed empty, yet a prickle at my nape told me eyes were upon me. Then it came, the faintest shift of brightness, as though the lamp itself had sighed. A figure detached from the gloom, its outline wavering, the ground beneath it untouched by any bar of shadow. Victor Haldane stood before me, his breast faintly aglow, his face gaunt with sleepless fervor. "You carry what I require, Doctor," he said softly. "Give it me and no harm will befall you." I tightened my grip upon the portfolio. "I carry nothing but duty, sir." His lips curved in a smile that held no warmth. "Then duty shall be your undoing." He reached within his coat and drew forth a small lantern, its shutter half open, spilling a pallid sheet of light that seemed to eat the shadows about us. My own outline wavered upon the stones, thinned as though I too might dissolve. Before he could advance further, a sudden cry split the fog. "Now, Lestrade!" And Holmes was upon him, springing from the shadow of a doorway like a striking hawk. In an instant the lantern was dashed to the stones, its glow extinguished. Constables closed in from either side, truncheons raised. But Haldane fought like a man possessed. With one hand he flung another of his smoke canisters, filling the street with a choking mist. Shapes reeled and stumbled. Shouts rang out. I glimpsed him darting for the grating at the curb, the same escape he had twice employed before. Holmes's voice rang above the tumult. "Block the sewer. Drive him to the light." Men surged to obey, but Haldane, desperate, clawed at the iron cover with frenzied strength. For a moment it seemed he would vanish once more. Then Holmes himself seized him by the collar, dragging him back into the open. The two struggled fiercely, the pale chemist twisting with almost inhuman agility. But Holmes held fast, his lean frame taut with determination. Lestrade's men closed round, and at last the man without a shadow was borne to the ground, his arms pinned. When the smoke thinned, he lay gasping, his coat torn open, revealing a crude apparatus strapped to his chest, a lantern with mirrors and lenses fed by a small battery. Holmes bent over it, examining with swift precision. "Her devil's harness," he said grimly. "See, Watson, how it projects forward a counterglow to devour his shadow." Ingenious, but not infallible, Lestrade snapped the cuffs upon the prisoner's wrists. Haldane glared up at us, his eyes burning with thwarted pride. "You may cage me," he hissed, "but light is not yours to command. Others will follow." Holmes straightened, his expression unreadable, perhaps. "But tonight, Mr. Haldane, London keeps her shadows." As they led the prisoner away, I felt the chill of the fog deepen, though the lamps glowed steadily. Holmes placed a hand upon my arm. "You acquitted yourself well, Watson. The danger was real, yet the principle holds. No trick of light endures when truth is brought to bear. Still, I fear this is not the last we have heard of men who would make science their cloak for crime." He looked once more into the mist, where the city lay restless and unquiet. The struggle was over for now, but in his eyes I saw the reflection of something larger, an awareness that knowledge itself could be twisted into peril, and that it would ever be his task to guard against it with reason, vigilance, and the unyielding pursuit of truth. The hansom which bore us back to Baker Street carried with it more silence than speech. Lestrade had departed with his prisoner, his satisfaction plain enough, but Holmes, though outwardly composed, sat with his arms folded, and his gaze fixed upon the streaming lamps beyond the window, his brow drawn with a tension I had come to recognize. Victory had been secured, yet he did not look like a man content with triumph. When at last we reached our rooms, he went directly to the desk and withdrew Haldane's leather notebook from the drawer where it had been secured since the night of the warehouse attack. He set it upon the table, as one might a chess piece not yet brought into play. "Watson," he said at length, "the man is captured, but the idea remains loose. Mark my words, prisons have contained bodies. They have never yet contained knowledge. You fear another may take up his work. I fear more than that. Haldane himself was but one link in a chain. Did you note how readily he secured apparatus from Bracknell, how he moved among lanternists and clerks as though they knew him? No invention grows in isolation. There is a circle, however small, who have glimpsed his methods. And now the city whispers of the man without a shadow. That whisper alone may tempt others to experiment where he failed. I confess the thought chilled me, for already the tale had the shape of rumor, the sort of grotesque novelty which London chews with appetite. Holmes opened the notebook once more and spread the pages. His long finger traced a line of cramped script. Here, Watson, lies the unfinished chord. He wrote of a catalyst, a missing component from the ancient manuscript. Without it, his harness falters. With it, he believed he might render not only shadowless forms, but shapes wholly displaced, outlines shifted from their bodies. Such a notion, though extravagant, could have consequences I scarcely care to imagine. And Penruddock? I asked. If the manuscript was foreign, might it not already have travelled further than we know? Holmes regarded me keenly. Your question strikes the heart of it. Penruddock is no mere solicitor conveying a client's papers. He is custodian of knowledge whose origin he has deliberately concealed. His silence nearly proved fatal. We must press him again, and with greater severity. The following morning we repaired once more to Bedford Row, Lestrade meeting us there with a scowl. He had lodged Haldane securely in Newgate, but the man's fervour had not abated. He had spent the night raving of light without shadow, a prophet crying in his cell. Penruddock received us with evident dread. His hands trembled as he gestured us into the chamber, and he seemed already to anticipate Holmes's questioning. "Sir," Holmes began without ceremony, "the time for discretion is ended. You told us the manuscript was ancient and foreign. In truth, from whence does it come?" The solicitor's lips compressed, then parted with a sigh of defeat. "Very well. The manuscript is housed not in England but in Prague. It belongs to a client whose family has guarded it for centuries, a relic of an alchemist said to have served the Emperor Rudolph. Its pages are filled with strange symbols, many nonsensical, but a few, too few, bear a disturbing resemblance to modern formulae. My client feared that publication would invite dangerous experiments, and so he commissioned me to oversee a cautious reproduction, disguised as legal correspondence." "And how did Haldane learn of it?" Penruddock's eyes flickered. "I cannot say with certainty. Perhaps through an indiscretion of my own, or by bribing some clerk who handled the correspondence. But he knew enough to follow me." Holmes leaned forward, his voice low. "The plate he stole from you is incomplete. But tell me, was there indeed a missing catalyst?" Penruddock hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. The manuscript speaks of a substance, lux salis, the salt of light. I took it for metaphor. Yet in the margin was a note in a later hand, describing a preparation of crystals dissolved in spirit. I could not decipher it wholly. I did not think it practical." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "And yet Haldane pursued it, as though it were the philosopher's stone itself. That, Watson, is where genius becomes dangerous, when it breathes life into metaphor." Penruddock buried his face in his hands. "Then even in prison he will continue to dream of it." "Precisely. And dreams, when shared, may become contagion. That is why we must seal every door by which this knowledge might escape." Lestrade, impatient, declared that the Yard would guard both Penruddock and his papers with vigilance. Yet Holmes did not look satisfied. As we departed, he murmured, "He speaks truth enough, but not the whole truth. There is still a piece we lack." That night Holmes sat late, studying both the notebook and the clear slide borrowed from Penruddock. The lamplight threw his profile into sharp relief, and I saw the intensity of a man who will not rest until the pattern is complete. At length he laid down the lens and turned to me. "Watson, there remains a lair unvisited. Haldane's apparatus was crude yet effective. He could not have perfected it in the open. Somewhere in this city lies a workshop where he carried out his trials. Until we find it, we cannot know the full extent of his knowledge, and if he has accomplices, then we may expect that workshop to stir again, even while he languishes in Newgate. That is the danger. Men may be caged, Watson, but ideas have wings." The following day Holmes led me across London to the squalid warrens south of the river, where old warehouses leaned like tired sentinels against the fog. He questioned rag-pickers, costermongers, and rivermen with a quiet persistence, until at last a clue emerged. A night watchman who swore he had seen strange glows seeping from the shutters of a derelict warehouse near Blackfriars, and heard the hiss of chemical fires within. Holmes's face lit with grim satisfaction. "That, Watson, will be our destination. We shall enter tonight, and see whether London's shadows conceal more than one man's madness." As dusk fell, we approached the place, its windows blind, its timbers streaked with mildew. A faint trace of sulphur lingered at the door, as though it had soaked into the very wood. Holmes set his hand to the latch, his eyes gleaming in the half-light. "Whatever we find within, Watson, It will tell us whether Haldane was solitary dreamer or the herald of something larger. Prepare yourself, for here the case may yet cast a shadow longer than any we have known. The door yielded with a reluctant groan, the rusted hinge protesting as though it had long ago grown accustomed to secrecy. A damp draught met us, carrying with it the bitter tang of burnt sulphur and the sharp sting of nitrate. Holmes slipped inside first, his lantern shielded with a hand so that its glow was a thin slit upon the darkness. I followed, revolver in pocket, my senses taut with the knowledge that the air itself seemed charged with hidden design. The interior was a vast, echoing chamber, its beams heavy with dust, the floor littered with scraps of glass and paper. Yet amid the ruin there was evidence of recent work. Benches set with retorts and flasks, copper wires snaking into crude batteries, and a canvas screen upon which some distorted outline had been projected in charcoal smears. The place reeked of obsession. Holmes moved methodically, his keen eye drinking in each trace. He paused at a bench where several lantern casings lay disassembled, their mirrors blackened with soot. With delicate fingers he lifted one lens, holding it to the beam of his lamp. Crystals clung to the glass, glimmering faintly like powdered frost. "Lux salis," he whispered. "Our metaphor made substance. You see, Watson, the preparation Penruddock dismissed has here been attempted in earnest. Haldane may not have perfected it, but others have worked beside him." I glanced about uneasily. "You believe he had accomplices?" Holmes's expression was grim. "The apparatus is too varied for one man's hand. See, this coil was soldered by a tradesman, that slide etched with professional precision. Haldane provided the fever, but others supplied the craft. We faced not a solitary visionary, but a small cabal. At that moment a sound reached us, the faint scrape of a boot upon stone. Holmes extinguished the lantern in an instant, and we crouched in the dark, listening. Footsteps moved across the floor below, unhurried yet purposeful. A match was struck. Then the flare of a lamp revealed a figure cloaked in heavy coat and muffler, his features obscured. He crossed to the bench, leafed swiftly through a sheaf of papers, then slipped them into his breast pocket. Holmes's hand tightened on my arm. "Remain still. We must observe before we act." The intruder worked with practiced assurance, selecting certain slides and vials while discarding others. He murmured to himself in a tongue I did not recognize, harsh consonants foreign to my ear. When at last he turned toward the door, Holmes moved like lightning. In 2 strides he was upon him, his hand closing round the man's wrist with iron strength. "You will oblige us." "Sir, by remaining," Holmes said coldly. The muffler slipped, revealing a gaunt face with high cheekbones and eyes that burned with fanatic fire. He struggled briefly, then stilled, his lips twisting into a smile. "You are too late," he said in heavily accented English. "The work is larger than one man. Shadows fall everywhere." Holmes forced him to a chair, his own gaze sharp as steel. "Your name?" The man inclined his head with a mocking courtesy. "You may call me Carroll. That is enough." Holmes searched the pockets swiftly, producing the stolen papers. He scanned them, and I saw his jaw tighten. "Watson, these are diagrams of the completed apparatus, refined beyond what Haldane wore. See here the alignment of mirrors, the harness for portability, the treatment of lenses. Haldane dreamed of command over shadow. This man and his fellows mean to perfect it." Carroll's eyes gleamed with triumph. "You cannot stop it. We have what we need, and others wait across the sea. London is only the beginning." Holmes regarded him in silence, then bound his wrists with cord and turned to me. "This confirms my suspicion, Watson. Haldane was but the spark. The fire has already caught elsewhere." We escorted our captive to the yard, where Lestrade received him with mingled satisfaction and alarm. The inspector was quick to clap him in a cell, yet his eyes betrayed unease as he listened to Holmes's account. "If what you say is true, Mr. Holmes, then this is no common case of assault and theft. We have stumbled into something wider." "Precisely," Holmes replied. "We must treat it as contagion, suppress the rumors, conceal the details, guard every scrap of evidence. Knowledge is more dangerous than dynamite." That night, back at Baker Street, Holmes worked into the small hours, copying certain passages from the notebook and burning others in the grate. I watched the pages curl and blacken, uneasy at the destruction yet recognizing the necessity. He paused only to speak a few words. "There is a balance, Watson. Science is the servant of mankind, yet in unwise hands it becomes tyrant. Our duty is not merely to solve crimes, but to prevent them before they are born. When at last he sank into his chair, violin across his knees, the first pale light of dawn was stealing into the room. He drew the bow across the strings, and the sound was low, searching, like the voice of a man who has glimpsed depths not meant for human eyes. I set down these events with the knowledge that though Victor Haldane lay in Newgate and Carroll in the custody of the Yard, the case was far from ended. For in the dark alleys and secret chambers of Europe, there were others who dreamed of walking without shadow. And Holmes, with the melancholy foresight that was ever his gift, understood that we had not quelled a single man's madness, but uncovered the first stirrings of a movement. As I extinguished the lamp and prepared for rest, his final words lingered in my ear. The true enemy, Watson, is not the man who carries the lantern, but the idea that others may yet build it brighter. We have won the night, but the dawn will bring its own shadows. Holmes was not one to allow the dust of a case to settle upon his desk, least of all when he sensed currents still moving beneath the surface. The morning after Carroll's capture, he was already in motion, dispatching telegrams to acquaintances in Prague, Vienna, and Paris, men of learning and obscure trades who trafficked in manuscripts, optics, and chemical curiosities. His energy was tireless, yet beneath it I discerned a strain of unease. It was rare to see him doubt the completeness of his victory, and rarer still to hear him speak, as he did now, of ideas slipping past prison bars like light through a shutter's crack. By noon a reply came from Prague. A scholar of antiquities confirmed that the manuscript of which Penruddock spoke indeed existed, preserved in a cloister library, but jealously guarded by a noble family. Copies, however, were rumoured to have been made in secret during the last century. Fragments passed from hand to hand among alchemists and charlatans. It was no wonder, then, that echoes of its contents had reached Haldane and his circle. Holmes tapped the telegram with his long forefinger. "Do you see, Watson? The danger lies not in one parchment, but in the scattering of its seeds. Wherever one lands, some hungry mind will attempt to cultivate it. Our task is to learn how many such fragments exist, and who now tends them." That afternoon we visited Newgate, where Haldane awaited trial. The jailer led us down echoing corridors, his lantern casting bars of yellow across the damp stones. Within his cell the chemist sat cross-legged upon the straw, his face pale but his eyes burning with undimmed fervour. He looked up as Holmes entered, and a smile curved his lips. "So, the great detective," he said softly. "You think you have caged me, but it is not I who matter, it is the light. The light will walk free." Holmes regarded him with a calmness that concealed his watchfulness. "You had collaborators, Haldane. One we know, Carroll. Who were the others?" The prisoner gave a short laugh. "You will never find them all. They are not criminals in your sense. They are men of learning, men who refuse to bow to superstition or law. You call it crime. They call it progress." Holmes's voice sharpened. "Progress that begins in shadows ends in ruin. Where is the workshop's true master?" Haldane leaned closer, his chains rattling. "You think me the master? I was but the herald. Already others prepare the lens, the salt, the harness. Across the sea, across the continent. Soon London will not be the only city where shadows betray their owners." Holmes turned without reply, signalling the jailer to secure the door. As we stepped once more into the chill corridor, he murmured, "He tells us what we suspected, Watson. He was but the symptom. The disease runs deeper." We emerged into pale daylight, the fog beginning to lift from the city. Holmes walked swiftly, his head bent, his lips moving in silent calculation. At last he said, "The key lies in the documents we took from Carroll. They were more advanced than Haldane's notes, too advanced for his hand alone. Someone else supplied that refinement." Back at Baker Street, he spread the diagrams once more across the table. I recognized sketches of mirrors, prisms, and lanterns, but beside them were annotations in another script, neater, more assured. Holmes compared them with Haldane's scrawl and gave a curt nod. "As I thought, this is the hand of a trained engineer, not a fevered visionary. And note, several measurements are in metric units, not the English scale. That points us eastward." Before evening, another telegram arrived, this time from Vienna. It spoke of a certain Dr. Stefan Orloff, a Russian émigré known for his experiments in optics, lately absent from his lodgings, believed to have gone to London under a false name. Holmes's eyes gleamed. The spider at last chose his thread. Orloff is no dreamer but a man of hard science. If he has joined this enterprise, then Haldane was only the mask to distract us, while Orloff labored unseen. That night, Holmes and I, accompanied by Lestrade, returned to the warehouse at Blackfriars. It had been secured since Carroll's capture, but Holmes insisted upon a more thorough search. With his lantern, he examined the beams, the flooring, the hidden alcoves. At last he struck upon a concealed compartment beneath one bench. Within lay a metal case, carefully packed with vials of crystalline powder, sketches more precise than any we had yet seen, and a single letter in French. Unsigned but sealed with the now familiar triangle. Holmes read it aloud, his voice low. The first trials succeed. The harness functions, but stability requires the perfected salt. Secure the catalyst from your English solicitor. We move soon to Paris, where funds and protection await. Delay is dangerous. He folded the letter slowly. You see, Watson, we stand not at the close but the middle of a campaign. The cabal shifts its theatre as easily as an actor changes costume. Tonight London, tomorrow Paris. If we do not sever the cord now, it may strangle Europe entire. Lestrade's face was grim. Then we must warn the French police. Holmes shook his head. Too blunt an instrument. If we sound the alarm, the conspirators scatter like birds, and each pursues the work elsewhere. Better to follow quietly, to learn their full extent before striking. And you mean to follow to Paris? I asked. His eyes gleamed in the lamplight. If need be, yes, for the shadowless man is no longer a solitary marvel, but the herald of an age in which crime may clothe itself in light. Such an age must be strangled at its birth. We left the warehouse with the case secured, the river glimmering faintly in the moonlight beyond. As we drove back to Baker Street, Holmes sat silent, his gaze fixed upon the dark horizon as though already measuring the distance to Paris. At last he spoke, more to himself than to me. The game changes, Watson. We have hunted a man. Now we must hunt an idea across borders. And in such a hunt, the true weapon is patience. I slept little that night, for my dreams were haunted by visions of cities without shadows, men moving like wraiths through lamplight, and Holmes's grave face bent above the fatal pages. It was clear that the case of the man who never cast a shadow had grown beyond London's fog-bound streets. We stood at the threshold of a pursuit that promised no easy resolution, only deeper mystery and greater peril. And as the dawn broke pale and uncertain over the city, Holmes, already at his desk, looked up and said with quiet resolve, "Pack your bag, Watson. The continent awaits us." The train bore us south through the chill morning mist, its iron wheels drumming a rhythm that seemed to echo Holmes's own taut composure. He had spoken little since his instruction to pack, but his silence was not of weariness. It was the silence of a mind arranging its pieces upon a board larger than London. I watched him as he sat with arms folded, eyes half closed, the faintest smile touching his lips whenever the countryside blurred past. To the untrained eye, he might have seemed asleep. I knew better. By noon we had crossed to Dover, and the sea stretched grey and restless before us. Holmes stood at the rail of the packet steamer, his gaze fixed on the horizon, where the French coast wavered like a shadow of its own. "Watson," he said quietly, "what we pursue is not merely a man nor even a cabal, but a contagion of thought. It has found expression in Haldane, refinement in Orloff, and finance in men whose names we do not yet know. If we strike blindly, we wound one limb while the body thrives. To sever the root, we must learn its depth. In Paris, the city met us with its peculiar blend of brilliance and menace. The boulevards glittered with electric lamps, and it was here, Holmes remarked, that the shadowless trick might find eager patrons among the cabarets and exhibitions. Yet behind the glamour lay narrow streets where conspiracies thrived like mold in damp stone. We took modest lodgings near the Gare du Nord, Holmes explaining that anonymity was now our shield. Our first call was upon Inspector Dubois of the Sûreté, a man of sharp features and sharper courtesy. He had received advance word from Lestrade, and greeted Holmes with evident respect. "You pursue dangerous quarry, monsieur," he said gravely. "Already whispers reach us of demonstrations, lanterns that erase the very outline of a man. Such wonders attract curious crowds, but behind them, I fear, is darker purpose." Holmes inclined his head. "Then we must see where the whispers gather. I would ask access to your informants among the lanternists and theatrical suppliers. There we shall find our trail." For 2 days, Holmes and I walked the city, speaking to vendors of optical novelties, questioning stagehands in music halls, tracing shipments of mirrors and chemicals. Slowly a pattern emerged. Several consignments of peculiar crystalline powder, described in ledgers only as sels blancs, had been purchased by an unknown gentleman giving the name Monsieur Lambert. Always he paid in gold, always he demanded secrecy. One such purchase had been made not a week earlier, delivered to a warehouse on the Rue des Récollets. Holmes's eyes lit with the spark of pursuit. There, Watson, is our Fox's new earth. Tonight we shall pay it a call. The building was unremarkable, its shutters closed, its courtyard empty. Yet as dusk fell, we observed faint glows seeping through cracks in the boards, unnatural glows, too steady for candles, too white for gas. Holmes motioned me close. They experiment even now. We must enter unseen. With the practiced silence of a cat, he scaled the low wall, and I followed, my heart pounding. At the door he produced slender tools, and within moments the lock yielded. We slipped inside, the air thick with the reek of sulphur and heated metal. What we beheld within froze me where I stood. The chamber was arranged like a theatre, benches set before a screen. Upon it danced grotesque shapes, figures without shadows, forms that flickered and dissolved as if untethered from substance. At the center stood a tall man with shaven head and commanding presence, adjusting a harness of mirrors strapped to a mannequin. His voice rang with authority. When perfected, this device shall render armies invisible, envoys untouchable, assassins unseen. Power lies not in cannon but in light. Holmes gripped my arm. Orloff, he whispered, the true master. Around the benches sat half a dozen men of varied appearance, bankers by their dress, perhaps politicians by their bearing. They watched with rapt attention as Orloff demonstrated the distortion of shadows, the vanishing of outlines. One muttered, with this no fortress stands secure. Another, we shall change the balance of Europe. Holmes's jaw tightened. You see, Watson? Not science alone, but politics. Orloff sells his shadowless dream as a weapon. That is why Haldane served as mask, to distract us while the true stage was prepared here. Before I could reply, a floorboard creaked beneath my boot. Orloff's head snapped round. Who is there? He barked. The lamps flared and the shadows on the wall twisted grotesquely. Holmes seized my sleeve. Too soon, Watson, we must withdraw. But already two of Orloff's men were moving toward us. Holmes flung open the door, and we bolted into the night, pursued by shouts. Through alleys we ran, the glow of lanterns at our backs, until at last Holmes guided me into a narrow passage where darkness swallowed us whole. We leaned against the wall, breathless. Holmes's eyes shone even in the gloom. We have seen enough. Orloff is no mere visionary. He courts patrons of influence, men who will pay for his invention with coin and protection. To strike him here is perilous. We must first gather proof, and how, I asked, when he knows we are upon him? By turning his own brilliance against him. He trusts light to cloak his secrets. Very well. We shall make light the instrument of his downfall. The following day, Holmes sought Dubois, laying before him a careful account of what we had witnessed. The inspector paled, yet nodded grimly. Without proof, the law cannot act. But give us evidence, a ledger, a plate, a witness, and we shall strike. Holmes's gaze hardened with resolve. Then tonight we return to the warehouse. Orloff believes himself master of light. Let us show him that shadows may yet betray him. As we prepared, I felt the weight of what lay ahead. The chase had begun with a single man in London, a phantom who cast no shadow. Now it had broadened into a struggle across borders, a contest not only of wits but of nations. And at the heart of it all moved Holmes, tireless, relentless, determined to bring truth to light, even as others sought to bury it in darkness. That night, as the lamps of Paris flickered in the mist, Holmes tightened his cloak and murmured, "The game nears its climax, Watson. But beware, for when men tamper with shadows, they may find themselves swallowed by them." And with that we set forth once more into the city, toward the warehouse where light itself had been forged into a weapon, and where Holmes intended to turn the conspirators' own brilliance into the means of their undoing. The night air pressed damp against our faces as we approached the warehouse for the last time. Paris lay hushed, its lamps glowing weakly through mist, the city unaware that within one shuttered building men plotted to strip it of its shadows. Holmes moved with a swiftness born of certainty, his lean figure gliding along the alley walls, every step calculated. I followed close, revolver in hand, my heart hammering at the knowledge that this would be the final play. Through a crack in the shutters we saw Orloff once more, his bald head gleaming in the lamplight as he demonstrated the harness before his assembled patrons. The distorted figure upon the screen shifted, melted, and vanished. A murmur of awe rippled through the room. It was then that Holmes set his plan in motion. From his pocket he drew a small mirror, polished to brilliance. With a deft movement, he angled it toward a lantern positioned in the courtyard, directing a narrow beam through a gap in the boards. The light struck the apparatus upon the mannequin, scattering its false glow across the room in a sudden blaze. At once the illusion faltered, the outline of the figure snapping back into clarity, its shadow returning in stark relief. The financiers gasped, half rising from their seats. Holmes flung wide the door, his voice cutting like a blade. "Gentlemen, behold the truth. Shadows are loyal to physics, not to charlatans. The trick fails when exposed to honest light." Orloff spun round, fury blazing in his eyes. "You meddle where nations will profit," he roared. He snatched at the harness, but the beam from Holmes's mirror dazzled him, and in that instant Dubois and his men, concealed till now, stormed the chamber. Cries rang out, chairs overturned, and the patrons were seized in their astonishment before they could flee. Orloff fought like a cornered beast, wrenching the harness about his chest and pulling a hidden switch. For a moment he seemed to vanish in his own radiance, his form wavering like heat over stone. But Holmes, anticipating the move, tilted the mirror to flood him with unbroken light. The distortion collapsed, revealing Orloff as he truly was, sweat-drenched, desperate, and suddenly very mortal. He sagged as the gendarmes clapped irons upon his wrists. The financiers, stripped of their illusions, protested wildly, claiming ignorance, crying that they were victims of deception. Holmes regarded them with cold disdain. Men who would purchase shadows cannot plead innocence when they are caught in the light. Later, as the prisoners were borne away and the apparatus dismantled, Holmes and I stood with Dubois in the quietened hall. The inspector clasped Holmes's hand with grave respect. "Paris owes you a debt, monsieur. Without your intervention, these men might have placed the very safety of Europe in peril." Holmes inclined his head. "The debt, Inspector, is owed to reason, not to me. When men abandon reason for ambition, they craft monsters out of trifles. Our task is only to remind them that truth is not so easily bent." We returned to London some days later, the city as grey and restless as when we had left it. Haldane remained in Newgate, broken of spirit once he learnt of Orloff's fall. Penruddock, relieved of his burden, vowed that the manuscript would be returned to its guardians in Prague, never again to tempt the curious. As for Holmes, he resumed his violin with quiet intensity. The music that drifted through Baker Street tinged with melancholy. I asked him once, as we sat together before the fire, whether he believed the danger ended. He lowered the bow and regarded me with those piercing eyes. "Ended, Watson? No, contained, perhaps. But ideas once loosed are like seeds carried on the wind. Some will fall upon barren soil, others may yet take root. It is our duty to be vigilant, for crime is ever inventive, and there will always be men who mistake cleverness for wisdom." He resumed his playing then, the low notes filling the room like a meditation. I sat back, watching the shadows flicker upon the wall, grateful for their presence. And as the night deepened, I reflected that though Holmes had once again restored the balance, the memory of those shadowless figures would never wholly fade. Yet I also knew that while he lived, there would be no darkness, however cunning, that could not be met and dispelled by the keen, unwavering light of his mind.